strumming my pain with his fingers, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his song, telling my whole life with his words, killing me softly with his song. So I came to see him, to listen for a while. And there he was, this young boy, a stranger to my eyes, strumming my pain with his fingers, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his song. He found my letters and read each one out loud. I prayed that he would finish, but he just kept right on, strumming my pain with his fingers, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his song.
Wow, that was a heck of a song, wasn't it, back in the day? How do you feel that relates to the question of the animus then, as experienced both by women within themselves, and men, when they receive the projection of it. Is there some kind of bridge of meaning that we could help for the guys to understand? Because it is female psychology really, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's something
Yeah.
that we maybe don't talk enough about.
We don't.
Would you
No.
say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I know you've been at pains to say that if men want to understand women, they have to understand the animus. They can't go to
Absolutely.
the anima to do that. That's not going to be helpful.
No, that's absolutely true. So again, sorry if this is rehashing stuff, so to speak, hashing. But if you understand the anima, you don't understand women, you understand men, guys. So in order to understand women, you have to learn about the animus. And the best way to do that, in terms of a mentor or a teacher, is from a woman who knows enough about it. If you look inside yourself, you will find your anima first. And then when you go out into the world, you meet the animus coming out you, and they're not the same thing. So that's an issue straight away we need to tackle.
Yes, it is. I think the most probably important point to make is that for women, from the get-go, men are strange to them.
Yeah.
Even when they're babies, they're children. For a woman, the first imprinting obviously is onto the mother in terms of relating.
Yeah.
And in order to relate to men, that has to be shifted off women and onto men.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, men are very different. It's not like as it would be for a man or a male child, whereby he imprints onto the mother, and then he later in life he imprints onto women, onto the same sex.
Yeah.
So I think really from the very start for women, men are different. They are unfamiliar, alien even to some extent.
Yeah.
And I think you see this reflected in the kinds of ways that women express themselves creatively, sometimes through art, through music, as we've just been listening to.
Yeah.
And it's then that it really hits home, I think.
That's
just how different.
Yeah. It is that point, isn't it? That point of hitting home that leads
Yes.
to understanding. So
Yeah.
Roberta Flack's rendition of that song, which of course was written by someone else, but her rendition, her performance of it was something really, really special at the time, and that's echoed down the decades and still has an impact now. So as a woman, what do you think she's experiencing or portraying in the lyric as sung of the experience of that moment of projection of the animus in a classical Jungian way onto that young boy?
Well, just to give a little bit of context first, really. It wasn't written by Roberta Flack. We should say it was written by a lady called Laurie Lieberman, who is an American singer-songwriter back in the early 70s, and she plays guitar, she plays the piano, and her rendition of it, if you listen to it, is beautiful. It is beautiful in its own way, but there's something about Roberta Flack's arrangement of it, and the way that she sings it, and the way she plays the piano to it, and the way that she enters into the emotion, I think I would have to say, that makes it particularly special. And it's the emotion, obviously, that comes through in the song that acts like an affect bridge, I think, for women to that deepest part of themselves, to what we could call the platonic form, I think, of the animus. Wow. It's I think it's that penetrating.
Well, that's handy, I think, for men to be able to get a handle on. My own experience of listening to it was feeling that, but in a different way. It's almost like at right angles. So it's not to experience the anima's platonic form, but the potential for the masculine platonic form, which of course no man can instantiate directly, but you can perceive it, and to do that you have to get outside of ego consciousness.
You do.
Which is what I meant about really you need to ask a woman and get a woman to trigger in you as a man the perception of how the animus is. You then kind of feel it, and I believe that when that happens you're feeling something that's echoed down countless generations across tens of millennia of ancestral experience but it's very, very far removed from a man's consciousness, but very, very imminent in a woman's, in the way that you've been describing.
Yes, yeah. Well, there's something just in the fact that it's been written, apparently written, obviously, by a man, sung by a man, and it's just the penetrating nature of the words.
That's what, so that's the, just to be
Yes.
clear, that's the song that she's listening to.
Yes, which was she was inspired by
Yeah.
Don McLean
Don
singing
McLean,
it in a club in Los Angeles
When he was unknown.
when he was still
Yeah.
unknown. Yes, and that was it was the way that it impacted her.
Yeah, very interesting way that the way that you put that. And again, this is a man's psyche interpreting it.
Yeah.
So it may not be what you meant, but in that moment, when you said a man wrote it,
Yes.
the lyrics suggest that he's writing it inside her soul as he sings it.
Yes.
Because it was a woman's song. A
Yes,
woman wrote it,
she
but
did,
the
yes.
lyrics suggest that she received something which authored something within her, that there was a resonance between the inner and the outer, like you say, the platonic form and the presence of a
Most
real
definitely.
person.
Yes. Well, Hermes, where we often say what is within,
So
So
too
too
is
is
without.
without.
Yeah, indeed.
and I think that's very clear here that
Yeah.
that's what's happening, and I know Laurie Lieberman herself said she felt so moved by that experience. It was literally, and it's in the song, it's part of the lyrics,
Yeah.
that she felt as if this particular man knew her so well, so intimately, that he'd read her letters
Yeah.
and read them out loud. It again, the word that keeps coming to mind is that feeling of penetration at a very deep psychological level, being to feel as if you completely understood
So-
without even knowing somebody.
So to get beyond the Freudian notion of penetration, although that is
Yes.
linked in a
Yes.
sense, it means a penetration as in a journey or a portal opening to a woman's soul.
yeah, a
there's-
deep knowing or
yeah.
understanding, I would probably say. Yes.
And that's resonant between what this guy was doing, the young Don McLean, who had no
Yeah.
idea, did he, who this
No.
girl was in the audience.
No.
No idea he was having that effect on her. But there was that resonance from within to what he was saying, and in that moment the portal opened, and that probably went so deep it was right in the genome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think very much so. So much so. I mean, obviously there would have been other people, other women there at the club when he was singing, but from her perspective, that didn't matter.
Yeah.
It was as if it was being delivered for her, especially for her,
Yeah.
and in such a way that he understood her emotionally.
Wow.
Even in all her dark despair,
Yeah.
you know, there'd been no other communication other than him singing.
Yeah.
And it was received in that way as if he had that depth of understanding of her and that intimate knowledge about her. That's how deep it went.
Yeah, he played an acoustic guitar, didn't he, Don McLean?
He
That was
did.
his signature
Yes,
instrument, so it's almost
yeah.
as if the plucking of the strings was in harmonic resonance with
Yeah.
the strings of her heart. And
Yes.
you find that as a theme, don't you, through myth,
You do.
right back into the classical world and as far as we have historical records of, so there is that sense of resonance that comes through.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, even as a man. But I'm curious then,
Yeah.
how would that feed through into a young girl when she hits puberty and then the genome triggers the release of imprinting onto men? And this is very unconscious, of course, it just happens, doesn't it? It happens for men too. You suddenly become aware of an impetus to mate and relate, maybe not even to mate, but certainly to relate, that kicks in. And then there's that, as you say, that shifting of identification
Yeah.
and nurturing by the mother, and that moves on to this strange other that is the masculine.
Well, clearly there's a fascination in that, and that's potentially double-edged,
Oh yeah.
because it can lead you into some very positive experiences of men, and obviously, you know, the flip side of that is it can lead you into some very difficult and dangerous situations as well. And it's not always possible to know or make that distinction, like you say, when you're very young, in sort of early adolescence. And so much will depend as well on your relationship to your father,
Indeed.
if indeed your father is around,
Yeah.
and your own mother's animus and the way that she relates to herself on the inside and how she relates to outer men. So all of these things help to create a picture.
That's interesting.
Going forwards. Yeah.
Of course, we know now that Jung was wrong when he said that the animus for a woman is the result of her having a minority of male sex genes. We know that's just not true.
It's just not true.
But there is something that is female, which is within the potential of a woman, that is genetic, which represents an anticipation of the masculine, and that must be on time release, otherwise the relationship at the beginning to the father will be the same as to the mother, and it's not, as you say, for both sexes.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something there which is triggered on time release, and when it happens it's compulsive, it fills your mind, you feel the intentionality pushing you. Both sexes will do. But there's a qualitative difference, isn't there, between the anima and the animus, which is very, very ancient, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. And if we were to sort of cast our minds back to sort of Paleolithic times and...
Our collective minds. I'm not that old.
Yes,
the ancestral mind.
I do.
I'll own up to being 64, but that's it. Not 640,000.
Well, you've got a good imagination.
Oh yeah, okay, I can do it.
So
now,
you can use that.
I'm there. I'm done. Yeah. Okay, I'm there. Yeah.
And we were to allow ourselves to kind of immerse ourselves into what it would have been like living in those times, and what it would have been like for a young female baby or child growing up in that environment, and all the sights, the sounds, the smells, you know, the fact that the father may well have been dressed in furs, been very hairy, bringing back, you know, gone out hunting, bringing back food, it might have been bloodied. I mean, it's certainly a feast for the senses, if nothing else, but it's also, you know, the father clearly will, like I say, will naturally be more hairy, will appear to be, you know, maybe bloodied, more aggressive, going out doing very different things to the mother, and those instincts that formed then, of course, will have imprinted on the genome.
Yeah, they will indeed.
For women.
Yeah.
And we still have that in us. Yeah. We've not escaped that.
No, we haven't, and we still have to reckon with it.
We do, yeah.
That's very, very interesting. So, we can see then how in the Paleolithic period, two very fundamental roles, if you like, were distinguished out. One was the relationship of the mother to the child, and one the father to the child. And we know from our clinical practice that when we work in depth with people of either sex or sexual orientation, this is something independent and deeper and far more profound than any surface structure differences in sexual lifestyle, that the mother for both sexes provides the relationship to the inner world, and that's because of how the mother and that equivalence, if you like, in terms of early imprinting, helps to shape a child's consciousness and sense of identity. So the inner world, the relationship to the child's self-worth, comes initially from the mother.
Yes.
And then the father literally appears at the cave mouth,
yes.
or metaphorically these days, but in those days literally so. And the father's role is to be the interface between the family, and particularly a young child, and the world. And as you say, then bringing the world into that primal relationship is the role of the father, and hence you get this imprinting from what you said.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I think even that idea of the father coming back from the outer world into the sort of intimacy of the cave as well. I mean, that's a kind of a crossing of a boundary, a kind of a penetration from the outside to the inside. Yeah. And at the same time being so obviously different from the mother. It's bound to have an effect. It can't not have an effect. And we still can't escape that past today. Hence the phenomena of the bad boy and women falling for bad boys, because...
Good point. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just, pardon the pun, fleshing that out a little in this particular context, like its origin and then how that might manifest itself today in our times. The bad boy then, where does it come from? Why has it persisted?
Well, it's persisted because it's a valid form of adaptation for women to men in some regards. I mean, bad boy types are synonymous with maybe survival and literally bringing home the bacon, resources. Also the fact that there might be that element of danger to them as well, I would say can be animating. And you know, we're, just as men like to be animated by women, you know, so too do women like to be animated by men. So that sense sometimes of danger, of risk, you know, literally living a little bit on the dark side can all be potentially very exciting, but it can come at a cost, of course, as well.
It can.
And for some women, you know, a very big cost.
Yeah. But in a very competitive environment then, say in the Stone Age, when mating is the only object of relating, because that equates to survival, then somebody who we might consider to be a psychopath today would have traits that would be useful for survival. Because their seeking system will be overamped, they'll be out all over the place because they don't believe in boundaries. Everybody else's boundaries are to be penetrated, literally and metaphorically. So they're out getting resources, they're out taking risks, which means they're interested in novelty. Novelty provides opportunity for survival and for, again, pushing the envelope out.
Yes, plus novelty is stimulating for women. I think women feel animated by the idea of novelty, and if they can't provide that for themselves, and the idea of experiencing it through another person, through a man and a relationship to a man, you know, the end result is the same in effect. And like I say, that's extremely animating. But it has inherent dangers. Because men like that tend to, by and large, be more aggressive.
Yeah,
like you say, you've got traits of psychopathy in there and so on.
Or if they're not overtly aggressive, then they will use things like humour. They'll use a sharp, witty, mercurial intelligence to manipulate others, and we can see how politics then can attract psychopaths, and also how politics equals power, equals value in a reproductive sense. All of those things move on. In the present day, though, our culture has created bad girls, which is an interesting phenomenon. In a way that probably wouldn't have happened in the past because of this blurring of roles and responsibilities. That brings its problems as well, of course. But beneath that, and I would personally, I don't know if you would agree, I would consider this present zeitgeist as superficial and temporary, given history, that there is a waveform. What's happening now will pass, one way or the other. There will be a change in the future, but the fundamentals are what we're talking about, and I guess we're doing that because it's the fundamentals that turn up in mental illness. It's the fundamentals that turn up in individuation. For those of you of a Jungian orientation will know what that means. That lifespan development process of accessing your deep inherited, Jung would have called it archetypal roots, and bringing that forward. So they're there whatever happens, aren't they, with respect to the culture? They
are, no matter how much the culture changes, and clearly it does change over time, those things stay true. And I think that is enormously helpful for anybody really who feels disenfranchised by the culture, whether it's men or women, in terms of their relationships, because it means that there is still something that you can tap into to understand where you've come from, what's brought you here today. And I think it's a sustaining thing in the face of a changing culture. And like you say, the culture will change again. And so the kind of opportunities that maybe young men and women want for themselves and maybe aren't happening right now will come along eventually. And I think that's a very reassuring idea.
It is, and you see the imprint of Jung's idea of archetypal patterns still present, don't you?
You do.
In the psyches of people. When the surface fluff is removed, I mean, people may come in for therapy, for example, or a personal development process, and be concerned about the environment and the times within which they live. But that always ducks down, doesn't it? Through these archetypal patterns, and deeper again into the foundation, which is instincts, and then deeper again into that which produces the instincts, which is the genome.
Yeah.
So they're the eternals, if we like, aren't they, with respect to biology?
They are, and if I can just add one other element into the equation, of course, there is a natural world too.
Yeah.
That we've been connected to, we are continuous with, and have been since prehistory. And that stands outside of the culture as well, to some extent, and that resonance that we have
That's true.
with the external world.
That's very interesting.
You know, people can get all sorts of psychological nourishment just from an acceptance of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know of or have experience of, for example, places over our lifetime that we've felt are special, have special meaning, or are literally sacred in some way for us, and we can continue to have a connection to those places regardless of what else is swirling around us in the culture.
That's interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yes, yes.
Naturally enough, because we all do. If we
have
inside.
to feel into it. You have to actually, tune down the noise of consciousness in order to appreciate that fully, don't you?
You do. I agree. And these representations are in culture presently distorted, but they are still present. You get them in films, movies. For example, obviously video games to some extent, but the video game environment is usually not that conducive to this kind of thing, because it's too virtual and it's too overamped, unnatural in that sense. But a good film can tell a good story, and it can root things deep into the landscape. What Jung talked about as a numinous presence within the land. And that's an archaic remnant, as Freud would have said, and agreeing with Jung in this particular sense. But you can also find these Paleolithic representations and attachments to literal space in the psyche of people too, which is another interesting topic that we could come to.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that this idea about space and territory and the seeking system, and particularly masculine psychology. I know you've experienced this because you've worked with some of the same people I have. We've worked together very often.
We have, yes.
With one person of either sex, sometimes with couples, but specifically about men. And I've noticed this literally over 40 years as a waveform of presentation, that when you get men, at the moment I'm seeing them very young. I'm seeing them in the teens doing this, but it used to be it was around midlife that it would first kick in, 35 to 40, the kind of age range that Jung talks about. If they were in a relationship that had gone a little bit stale, then the animation would start in this way, which is perhaps rather peculiar. Rather than projecting out onto a woman, it would be a place, and it wouldn't be like just a street or a house. It would be a geographical area that they had a connection to when they were younger, and they're drawn to that and almost have to patrol it. Like you get a solitary predator, like a tiger would have its range. This is the range. And they feel that urgency to go back, and then what follows on from that is the affect, the emotion from the time, and then the person that they were projecting onto at that time. Now this could be with somebody in their 40s, and I've worked with people in their 60s who would, in fact older. I can remember now one guy who was I think 72 and he was doing it. The pull back is not to the person they were relating to, but to the entire situation, which, as you said earlier, was animating about the music, Roberta Flack's song. So they go back there, and it's as if they can rediscover everything that had joined together to make that animating for them. Now it can follow on from that, and you get things, phenomena like stalking that can come from that, which is a related phenomenon. Which is obviously a highly controversial thing, because it's not something very pleasant, is it, for a woman to experience? No,
it's not. And I think when we've worked with people who have been having these experiences, like you say, and it tends to be mainly men.
It does,
Then I know that you've encouraged them to go back and to explore that place,
Yes.
and to maybe, if it, have some close-ish proximity to the woman involved without taking things any further.
Yeah.
So it's a way of going back and re-entering that particular state, shall we say, that they were in at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the Paleolithic thing again. It's animating in the way that you were saying, that
Yes.
The bad boy Jungian archetype, if you like, if there is such a thing specifically, I think it's deeper than a simple surface structure archetype. They become young, but not in a regressive sense. They don't know why consciously they're doing it, but their genome does. All of this is the result of gene expression. It's at that level that kicks off affect, emotion, drive and instinct, and a sense of continuity back through their timeline. So this is for the older guy who's looking back. But you can also get this phenomenon with younger people, and you can get it where there's proximity to a woman as well, which is slightly different.
Yeah, I think you get it wherever there's a lack of animation in people's lives, to be honest with you.
Yeah, indeed, yes.
Whether they're male, female, young or old, there's something associated with that time that was animating for them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's a huge draw.
It is, and as you know, it's a controversial thing to do, and you have to understand the context as fully as possible before you make the suggestion, in a very loose sense, that somebody follows a particular line. For example, there was a guy who was, I think, around 50 at the time, who was in a very stale relationship, and it had been that way for the duration of his marriage, pretty much. It was something of a sham of a relationship, and he'd met someone when he was 12 on a caravan holiday, and it was an animating experience at the time when the genome was releasing the imprinting, which would lead to relating and mating. The mating didn't happen, the relating was superficial, but the animation was there and it imprinted him. And then many years later he found her again. He looked for her and he found her because he had the memory. He wanted to go back to the caravan site, but he found her on Facebook, and he found that she lived not far from him, only about 3 miles in a straight line, out on the coast. And from her Facebook account it appeared that she would frequent the marina. And there's a walk around there which is about a mile if you stretch out the whole rectangle into one line. So he went there, but he asked me first, he said, should I do this? And I knew him well, I knew his psyche well, and we worked through why this had emerged, why the unconscious and therefore the genome had released these memories and this sense of attachment from the past. What was the value, what was the purpose? And I said, okay, well, go there, go to the marine lake, but don't get involved with this person, don't approach it beyond that, but go there and get the animation, and then take the energy off the image and off the memory, because that's its purpose.
It's absolutely it's its purpose, without a doubt.
It's not to go back, it's not to follow that person or stalk them, which is an added on when it goes too far. Should we say that the intentionality of the fantasy hasn't reached its proper expression in a legitimate sense, it tends to overamp itself and it can go into something unpleasant. Well, he went there and he did that, and he got the necessary affect and therefore the connection to his soul at that level that he needed to understand what had gone wrong in his marriage and what had gone wrong with his individuation process. So that's one example, and there are many others.
Well, his individuation journey stopped on the day he got married, actually.
It did, yeah.
And this is, sadly, it's the value of hindsight in some respects, but he knew in that moment that he was marrying the wrong woman.
He did.
And yet he went ahead with it.
He went ahead, yeah, absolutely.
And so in that sense, he completely overrode his instincts and the intentionality of his genome, which would have been for him to maybe marry someone with whom he could have had a much more fulfilling life, somebody who was maybe more, dare I say, intellectually fulfilling for him, but that didn't happen.
No, and then there was a mismatch.
There was a huge mismatch, and he was left searching for that memory, for that original animation that would light him up again and animate him, put him in touch with his soul and make him, fulfill his potential in the world in the way that he was intended to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So in that case, this particular
Yes.
one anyway, because every example is different,
It is.
you could see that there was a Paleolithic seeking system kicking in, and also that very ancient Mason relate drive to bring him back through an affect or an emotional bridge from the present to the past when he could access that. Now the difficulty was, of course, that he included the memory of that girl who was the same age as him, around 12 at the time, compared to a woman of 50 who was a grandmother, married, happily married, and all the rest of it. So he couldn't mix up the images. That's the clue, and that's the thing that in this instance he had to understand. It was okay to go to a place and another place to reclaim his connection to himself.
Well, sorry to interrupt,
No, it's okay.
but that comes back to the song, really, doesn't it? Because in effect, that's what Laurie did.
Yeah.
She went and she had this outer animating experience in a particular situation, and it penetrated her so deeply she was able to then go away and access her own animation, which then produced the song.
Yes.
By we could all be touched by that, by the lyric and that, because it goes so deeply.
Yeah.
And that's what was happening there, without a doubt.
Yeah, so on the surface we have two very different phenomena.
Yes.
One to do with men, and it's typical of men, and one to do with women, and it's largely typical, perhaps even archetypally typical, if you like, of women.
Well,
but at core it's the same thing.
It is the same thing.
Superficially different, core the same.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you could argue that maybe her way of having that experience was to go to a club, presumably a nightclub of some kind, where there were other people present, because that would have been a safer way to do it, to access that experience. Whereas, like I say, it's easier for a guy maybe to go to an area, maybe even...
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe there's something in that.
I've seen something similar with women, but not to the same extent, and that's why I'm drawing the distinction that with men there's something to do with an area of land. That the whole thing, it's like a dream state. If you analyse a dream and you don't take into account the environment, everything about it, the lighting, any buildings, interior, exterior, it's not just the characters in a dream, it's the backdrop to that which provides the context. And it's like that with space, with physical space. And there are other examples too, which I could touch on lightly, just to show the differences and the nuances that are involved in that. But it would be good to work on that.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so there are other instances which are nuanced differently. In a contemporary setting, in other words, if it's not a far memory, but it's something that triggers a recall of a far memory, say if people meet at work and then there's a fantasy projection onto someone. There was somebody, I had discussed the case before, he ended up doing an enactment and broke the back of a 30-year severe OCD through the enactment process. But what led him into that, as you remember, because I know you worked with the family too and you were present for the enactment, what led him into that was apparently the fascination with a woman called Miss Stone.
Yes.
And he was so fascinated with her that he carried a stone round with him all the time, a polished stone, and that was Miss Stone. And bear in mind, that sounds contrived in a Jungian sense. He knew nothing about Carl Jung, he knew nothing about alchemy, the philosopher's stone, or any of these other common symbols that you see trotted out by Jungians. This was natural. The woman and the stone became one, and he was in a terrible state, but she was beginning to siphon off some of the OCD. His animation towards her meant that his OCD became reduced, and he had it so severely he would sweat and he would be in a terrible state and he couldn't move out of his chair or open the office door or come home until he'd ritualised for hours. A terrible situation he was in. But he came to me about the OCD. It was a medical referral within a GP practice. He came to me about that, and we got the usual assessments. And then the real thing came through. The real in the sense of that which was trying to sort the problem out beneath the surface level of the symptoms, and that was the relationship to Miss Stone. And obviously, a hyper-rational approach to therapy would ignore that and would just focus on eliminating the symptoms of the OCD without realising that the solution was present in the form of his obsession with this woman. Now, he was actually married to a psychotherapist who worked for a national organisation that was involved in couples therapy, and as often happens, couples can't sort themselves out, so she agreed to him coming to see me. But I don't think she expected me to say what I said, which when I satisfied I had a complete picture, or as complete as possible, and had accessed his psyche to get confirmation through the methods that we use, that it was the right thing to do, I said to him, what you need to do with respect to Miss Stone is sail as close to the wind as possible, but do not cross the line. The reason being is you will get all the energy you need for transformation from that, and the way ahead will be indicated. And he did that. He did it. He followed exactly the suggestions that were given.
Oh, he did, yes.
And then he moved himself into a position where he was finally able to deal with this. And Miss Stone never knew. She never knew.
No.
That's a great way of dealing with it in the moment.
It is a great way. I think too the interesting thing about that particular case was that there wasn't actually an issue in the relationship between them.
Not as hard, no.
No. But a traditional Jungian approach probably would have said that whatever was being projected onto Miss Stone was significant, and it was something that was being projected outside of the relationship because there were issues between them.
That's a good point.
Well, as it happened, they were happily married.
That's a very good point, because that makes it different from the first case I discussed. Completely different.
It does.
Whereas in the first instance with the marina, the guy walking around the marina, his relationship was stale. Whereas this relationship was very good.
It was.
And I can say, and of course I'm not identifying anybody in doing this, that nearly 30 years later that marriage is still sound. I know it is. Because I have access, shall we say, to how they're doing, and they're doing really well. So that's wonderful. It was something else, wasn't it?
It was something else.
And the projection onto Miss Stone was the cure, working itself through in symbolic form.
That's right.
But although that wasn't a place as such, though it did involve places, specific ones. In his case, it was a beach where he would go to get his stones, although only one was really special. It was very, very important to follow that energy through. There are other cases, again, just a superficial one that's fairly common with younger men. They will fantasize about a woman they've seen, or they've had brief contact with, but nothing in a relational sense.
It's the stuff of films, that, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's the stuff of films.
It is the stuff of it, and there's lots like that.
Are.
And that goes back to the song, actually, doesn't it? Where she saw Don McLean,
that's right,
but had no real contact with him.
No contact now.
But then the image is introjected with such strength that it animates within and then goes out into the environment. They might be jogging, and then they're expecting literally to hallucinate this girl coming the other way. Or a vehicle will pass and she's driving the car, or he'll get on a bus and she'll be there. Whatever. She then occupies his inner space, which is an analogue to the outer space, so to speak, where he wants to have contact with this girl. This is with a younger man. But again, you see this element of space and relationship and that primal need to make contact. And that's to do with the anima, which is different obviously to the animus. But nevertheless there's that key relating thing and how the soul gets penetrated. So yeah, interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. I was thinking too, as you were speaking, about this idea of men sort of having both an inner and an outer space that they kind of define. It's something that typically men do in families too, in households.
It is,
You know, they might go around checking the doors at night, or, you know, making sure the boundary is secure.
It's instinctive.
It is instinctive as well.
Yeah, and not archetypal.
Yes.
Yeah, Jung said that archetypes were the self-portraits of instincts, and he was right, but I don't think he went far enough. It's more than just a still frame, which a portrait suggests. It's an animated fantasy, an entire narrative that's produced by the instincts, which then become projected into psychology and then out into the environment, where they take on a cultural form and are reflected back, and that's what people think is an archetype. But the true author of the archetype ultimately is the genome. There's talk of the master and his emissary with respect to the cerebral hemispheres. The true master is the genome, the emissary are the instincts, and if you want to know thyself, that's what you have to get to grips with, is the idea that the genome regulates everything on a time release basis. We adapt to that, and the emissary, literally, that delivers the drives for us to actualise in the world, are the instincts. They are different in subtle, nuanced ways between men and women, at bottom the same, but the expression of them is where it gets really interesting. And that song and how you picked up on that and drew my attention to it, reminded me of it, as you did, which is why we're discussing it today, really shows how the animus can do that for a woman, doesn't it?
It does. I think, again, though, that can happen for men with respect to the anima. I'm reminded of the Pre-Raphaelites and the mid-Victorian art critic John Ruskin. And he would, I think it was in the second volume of Modern Painters, where he makes a comment or he gives advice to the artists of the time in relation to painting and painting in nature. And he tells them to go out into nature and basically not to reject anything, and in that way they will penetrate nature properly. In other words, they will paint in a way that is truthful, which I think is interesting, because the same applies to the Pre-Raphaelites and the relationship to their muses as well. The way that they would use the muses to inspire their painting.
It was
as well.
Incredibly dynamic, wasn't it?
It was.
In that sense, which
of
all the psychologists, I guess, of the last 120, 130 years, Jung probably did the best job of understanding at that time. Although ultimately I do think it takes an artist, a creative, to really grasp it. Perhaps not in a psychological way, but in a representational way. It does take an artist to fully understand these forces. Yes,
it does. And that idea of not excluding anything, that is, whether it's a painting that's inspired by nature or a painting that's inspired by a beautiful woman, whatever that means, whether it's the beauty of nature, the beauty of the woman, it doesn't necessarily mean the image is perfect.
No.
And I think that's what he's suggesting there, that by including everything that can be experienced and can be understood. In other words, if you can penetrate the meaning of the thing that you're relating to, then there'll be a truthfulness.
That's interesting.
In the image that's expressed back at you.
Do you think that's the way into the Platonic form?
Yes, I do. Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, so the hyper-rational therapies can't touch this because they're so hyper-rational.
They've got nothing to offer at all, because there's no route in, no door into instinct, and therefore into the genome, the gene expression. So
and the transpersonalists are inflated. And that's something we can discuss on another podcast. But they go in the opposite direction. They inflate so much, they actually take their ego with them as they inflate, and so they're actually distancing themselves from their unconscious rather than accessing it. And that's why, of course, creatives who naturally enter into that realm, no matter what medium they use, are more authentic than any transpersonal psychotherapist, most depth psychologists, Jungian, Freudian, wherever they might be, and so forth. So it's really important, isn't it, to have that creative element. It's if you really want to distill something, here's something you could try. And I've done this.
I do, yes.
Many times over many decades. You get a group of men together. They might be a psychotherapy or a personal development group, or they might just be friends. Get them together and say, lads, we're going to talk about girls or women. And immediately everything breaks out in the usual stupid fashion, and other things get broken open, whatever substance they might want to use at the time. But once you get their attention, then there's a change. There's a state change which is palpable, and it's what was known as an abasement to people like Piaget, a lowering of consciousness. And all the smirking stops, the faces just fall as they begin to descend deeply into dark depths and access that which we all know, but know unconsciously and implicitly. So when you access that, then all of those young guys there, if they are young men, well, it can be men of any age or a mixed group, they can all start to distill out this thing which is collective to all men and that we all know and would all recognise, and literally you ask them to project it into the centre of the circle, and guess what, they all hallucinate her, they can all see her and she's all the same. And it's really important that you don't have an actual woman present for that, because that would be a contaminant to that process. It would be a distraction into an instantiation of the feminine, as opposed to what Jung called the archetypal, and what Plato understood, I think more accurately than Jung, as being the platonic form of the feminine, that which is inborn in men genetically, and the same will be the case for women.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
The probably some of the few images that are actually inherited.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah. Jungians go on about that a lot,
They do.
about inherited images, but they elaborate them through fantasy, which is a problem.
Yeah.
But when the psyche produces it spontaneously, you know it's authentic, because the psyche itself is a projection of other things. It's a projection of the genome, the biology, and then it's a projection of something probably beyond that, which is an organising field, the kind of thing that Rupert Sheldrake goes on about as a medium for bringing forth what he calls the presence of the past. And if you can experience that in your own mind, but more powerfully collectively through a group, you have an alchemical process at work. It's an amazing thing. But you can stimulate that, going back to the song, through that. The effect bridge can take you there, can't it?
Very much so, and it does. And I think, to use your analogy, if there were a group of women listening to that song, then then they would probably, like you say, once we've got past all the silliness and so on, feel it as if that man was performing just for them and for nobody else. Everybody else would be screened out, and it would be personal and intimately directed at them, and it would be as if the other women didn't exist.
Yeah. You can see a biological purpose for that, but if we reduce this only to biology, I think we can miss something. And that whatever it is that organises biology is also regulating biology, and I don't mean that in a woo-woo sense, I mean it in a much more fundamental and real sense of an organising principle, and that's the realm of the platonic form as it really is. And that's what you find, and that's what you can meet in a relationship to a real person. Although an individual never can fulfill the totality of the platonic form any more than any one individual woman or man can fulfill the entirety of the potential genome for the masculine or the feminine. It doesn't matter, because there's enough in there usually to draw the form to agree with the relationship and to project onto it. And if that works out as being true enough, you get everything you need from that one relationship. That's entirely possible.
Yes.
And it's basically what we seek. And it's basically where all the frustration occurs when that doesn't fit. And that's problematical, but then that's the process of personal development and individuation, to work through that and to contact your instincts, to work with emotions, to connect with the genome as it unfolds through lifespan development, and then you get where you're going. It's when we resist all of those things that we get neurotic. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I was thinking of John Ruskin's words again. That idea of select nothing, reject nothing. Because in that moment, there's an acceptance of wholeness, but imperfection as well.
Yeah.
That wholeness doesn't necessarily constitute perfection.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
So if you're looking for completion through a relationship, through another person, it's not perfection that you're looking for. You're looking for completion.
Yeah, now that's a huge thing, really.
Yes.
That people feel, don't they, that they're looking for perfection.
They do.
And the narcissism in our culture at the moment is being engendered
Yes.
top down by the culture,
Yes.
by certain forces within the culture, encourages a distortion of perfection and says firstly that it exists, and then that the various sometimes quite hideous representations of it are perfect, but then they hit them with, no, you're not perfect, you need to be more perfect.
Yes.
And it goes on and goes on and goes on and can never be fulfilled.
That's right.
And that's fundamentally neurotic, so the culture itself is engendering that kind of neurosis.
Very much so.
You see it in body dysmorphia, you see it in extreme tattoos, extreme piercings,
Yeah.
all of that kind of thing is an acceleration away from the simplicity of contact with wholeness.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes, which is why it should be rejected.
Yeah.
In favour of creativity. Creativity will give you all you need.
It will indeed. It gives a meaning. Creativity is the vehicle for true spirituality, I would say,
it is.
more than probably anything. So art and creativity is not about skill in reproducing something. It's not an artisan's craft. It's something that comes from within and is meaningful in the process of the making.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think whilst we can all sort of accept that, modern art, it doesn't necessarily always hit the right note. Installations of toilets and things like that, and in art galleries, and nonetheless, it's not just the technical ability that counts. I mean, if you look at some of the pre-Raphaelite artists, I mean, they did the most beautiful paintings, the most translucent colours, attention to detail, and so on. But they weren't photoreal. And again, I think there's been a great drive in recent years for people to be able to reproduce something in as not just in a realistic way, but in a photorealistic way, and then even beyond that. And very often it loses something. There's something missing from it, because why not just take a photograph? If that's the case. That's not the goal, is it?
No, it's technical augmentation to the nth degree.
Yes, it is.
Whereas something like a dream is
you can train that as a skill,
you
actually. It's not that difficult.
No.
Yeah.
Something like a dream is not photoreal.
No, it
Dreams
isn't.
are not photoreal.
No,
dreams are different to that.
Yeah.
So the closer you can get to a dream, and I don't mean like Salvador Dali would have done, famously, although I think he was providing a right angle to culture at that time, and that's valuable.
Yes.
But what I mean is something different, because dreams have an affect charge that's woven into the fabric of them. It's not just the characters, as we were saying earlier, it's also the environment and the relationship that you have to that. And that's worth of another podcast, actually, on dream interpretation. But good art is like a dream.
It has a narrative.
It has a narrative. High technical ability art is not like that. It's what you were saying. It's something you may as well take a photograph of. It's the overamping of an aspect of representation, which only represents lines and perspective. It doesn't represent affect, emotion, or narrative, as you say, as you rightly say. And as dreams are spontaneous products of the psyche, then the dream is a form of art, and expressive art. With a great painter like the pre-Raphaelites, that is like a dream.
Yes.
A good movie, although that is representation, still not perfect, is like a dream. And again, we can come to that in a future podcast. But hey, how about letting Roberta Flack have the last word with another one of her songs?
Yes, why not?
The one I'm thinking of represents the Platonic image.
Very much so.
And that got me. Damn! I've held out all the way through, and it's got me. You know what I mean?
I do. Yes.
Because that's the kind of thing that Plato intuited, and I think that was a profound insight that's only ever been copied by others since him, including Jung. But when an artist produces that through a song and attaches effect to it, it affects you.
This happens.
This happens, yeah. Cut. Time to go. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
So let's come back with something on dreams, dream analysis that will be useful and helpful.
Yeah, we'll revisit the inner landscape.
The inner landscape.
Rather than the outer one.
Yeah, and some surprises in there. Some very unusual surprises.
Yes.
See you soon, guys.
Thank you.
First time ever I saw your face, I thought the sun rose in your eyes, and the moon and the stars were the gifts you gave to the dark, and the endless skies, my love, to the dark, and the endless skies. And the first ever I kissed your mouth, I felt the earth move in my hand, like the trembling heart of a captive bird that was there at my command, my love, that was there at my command, my love. And the first time ever I lay with you, I felt your heart so close to mine, and I knew our joy would fill the earth and last till the end of time, my love, and it would last till the end of time, my love. The first time your face, your face, your face.
So lots of nice smiles.
Well, look at you, I'll be alright, you see.
That's
That's,
it,
that's,
Like that.
that's what happens.
Put you to sleep. There you go. Right, that was good. That was quick, wasn't it? Okay.